Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. Number the night shift, I've always found comfort in the sterile predictability of hospital routines. The rhythmic beeping of monitors, the squeak of orthopedic shoes on polished linoleum, the precise timing of medication rounds, they created a reliable structure that anchored my life. Even the night shift at Mercy General had its own comforting patterns. At least, that's what I believed until Dr. Marcus Holloway joined our staff. My name is Dr. Alina Chen. I've been working in the ICU at Mercy General for 7 years now. I've seen my fair share of death and suffering. It comes with the territory. But nothing in my medical training prepared me for what began 3 months ago when Marcus transferred from Boston Memorial. He arrived with impeccable credentials: Harvard Medical School, residency at Johns Hopkins, published research in prestigious journals. Administration was thrilled to have recruited such talent to our modest community hospital. At 42, he was handsome in that distinguished way that commanded respect: salt and pepper hair always neatly combed, wire-rimmed glasses perched on an aquiline nose, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. I remember the first time we worked together. It was a particularly grueling night shift. A multi-vehicle accident had sent 5 critical patients our way, and we were understaffed as usual. "Dr. Chen," he'd said, extending his hand. His grip was cold and dry. "I've heard good things. Shall we save some lives tonight?" There was something in his tone, a detachment that felt off, but I dismissed it. Surgeons often develop that clinical distance as a coping mechanism, and God knows he was efficient. We lost only one patient that night, an elderly man with too many internal injuries. The rest pulled through thanks largely to Marcus's skill. I should have paid more attention to what happened after we called time of death on the elderly patient. Most doctors have a moment of solemnity, a brief acknowledgement of failure when we lose someone. Marcus simply nodded, made a note in the chart, and moved on to the next case. But as he turned away, I caught something in his expression, a flicker of something that looked almost like satisfaction. The first unusual death occurred 2 weeks after Marcus joined our staff. A 36-year-old woman named Sarah Winters was recovering from routine appendectomy. Her vitals were stable, and she was scheduled for discharge the following morning. I remember checking on her during my rounds at 10 p.m. She was sleeping peacefully, her chart showing nothing concerning. At 3:17 a.m., her heart monitor flatlined. I was the first to respond, with Marcus arriving seconds later. We tried everything: CPR, defibrillation, epinephrine. Nothing worked. The autopsy later revealed cardiac arrest due to an unexplained arrhythmia. Rare but not impossible, especially with undiagnosed heart conditions. What bothered me wasn't the death itself, but Marcus's reaction. While I was still processing what had happened, he was already completing the paperwork, his handwriting neat and unhurried. When I mentioned how unexpected it was, he merely shrugged. "Death comes for us all, Alina. Sometimes it's simply one's time." I might have forgotten about Sarah Winters if not for what happened the following week. Another unexpected death, this time an elderly man recovering from hip replacement surgery. Then a middle-aged woman with pneumonia who had been improving steadily. Then a teenage boy who'd survived a severe asthma attack only to inexplicably code in the middle of the night. All during Marcus's shifts, all defying medical explanation. I began to notice other things too. Marcus never ate in the cafeteria with the rest of us. He kept to himself during breaks, often disappearing to parts unknown within the hospital. And there was the matter of his extraordinary energy. He never seemed tired, even after the most grueling shifts. While the rest of us dragged ourselves through the final hours with caffeine and sheer willpower, Marcus remained crisp and alert, his movements precise, his mind sharp. "How do you do it?" I asked him once as we were updating charts at the nurse's station. It was 4 a.m. and my eyes were burning from fatigue. He looked up, that not-quite smile playing on his lips. "Do what?" "Stay so fresh. 20 hours into a shift and you look like you just started." He adjusted his glasses, a gesture I'd come to recognize as his way of buying time before answering. Clean living, I suppose. No vices to drain my energy. It was a non-answer, but I was too exhausted to press further. The turning point came about 6 weeks after Marcus arrived. I was working a double shift due to a colleague's illness. Around 2 a.m., I went to the pharmacy to retrieve medication for a patient. The hospital was quiet, that peculiar stillness that settles over medical facilities in the dead of night, when the administrative staff has gone home, visitors have left, and only the essential personnel remain to keep watch over the ill and injured. As I approached the medication room, I heard Marcus's voice. He seemed to be speaking to someone, though I couldn't make out the words. Curious, I slowed my pace. The door was slightly ajar, casting a thin slice of light into the darkened hallway. I peered through the gap. Marcus stood alone in the room, his back to the door. He was holding something small and glinting in his palm, a vial perhaps. but it was what he was doing that froze the blood in my veins. He was speaking in a language I'd never heard before, guttural and rhythmic, almost like a chant. The air around him seemed to shimmer, as if heat were rising from his body. I must have made some small sound of surprise because he suddenly stopped and turned. Through the crack in the door our eyes met. His were different. The pupils expanded until they consumed the iris entirely, black and bottomless as wells. I stumbled backward, nearly falling in my haste to retreat. By the time I regained my balance, the door had opened fully, and Marcus stood there, eyes normal again, that same professional smile on his face. Eleanor. Did you need something? My heart was hammering so hard I was certain he could hear it. I was just getting medication for Mr. Ramirez in 412. Of course. He stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. Don't let me keep you. I forced myself to walk past him into the medication room, feeling his gaze on my back like a physical weight. My hands trembled as I located the proper drawer and retrieved the prescribed pills. When I turned around, he was still watching me, head tilted slightly as if assessing a specimen. You look tired, Eleanor. Perhaps you should take a break. The on-call room is empty, I believe. I'm fine, I managed, clutching the medication cup like a shield. Just a few more hours to go, he nodded, that unsettling smile never wavering. Well, don't push yourself too hard. We need you at your best. I mumbled something non-committal and hurried past him. As I walked away, I could still feel his eyes on me, cold and calculating. That night I couldn't sleep despite my exhaustion. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcus's face, those black, empty eyes staring into mine. I told myself I had imagined it, a trick of the light, a hallucination born of fatigue and stress, but deep down I knew better. The next day I began my investigation. I started with the most obvious approach. I Googled him. His credentials checked out. Harvard Medical School class of 2008, residency at Johns Hopkins completed in 2012, staff position at Boston Memorial until his recent transfer. There were even a few photos of him at medical conferences, that same reserved smile on his face. But when I dug deeper, inconsistencies emerged. There were no personal social media accounts, no mentions of family or friends. His published research, while impressive, focused on an unusual area: cellular regeneration and energy transfer between living organisms. One paper theorized about the possibility of one organism extending its life by absorbing energy from another. I contacted a former colleague who now worked at Boston Memorial. What she told me sent chills down my spine. Marcus Holloway, yeah, he worked here for about 2 years. Brilliant doctor, but weird. There was an investigation before he left, several unexpected deaths during his shifts. Nothing was ever proven, but, well, the staff nicknamed him Dr. Death, not to his face, of course. That night I volunteered for the night shift again, despite having worked the previous night. I told myself it was to keep an eye on Marcus, but truthfully, I was afraid of what might happen if I wasn't there. Around midnight, an elderly patient named Ruth Simmons was admitted with congestive heart failure. She was stabilized quickly and resting comfortably by 1 a.m. I made a point of checking on her frequently, especially when I noticed Marcus reviewing her chart. At 3 a.m., that same deadly hour when so many of our unexplained deaths had occurred, I was at the nurse's station updating records when I realized I hadn't checked on Mrs. Simmons in almost 40 minutes. A sense of dread washed over me as I hurried toward her room. The door was closed, which was unusual. As I approached, I heard that same chanting I'd heard in the medication room. My hand froze on the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to call security, to do anything but open that door. But I couldn't abandon my patient. I pushed the door open as quietly as possible. The room was dimly lit, only the small light above the bed providing illumination. Marcus stood with his back to me, leaning over Mrs. Simmons. His hands were hovering just above her chest, not quite touching her. Between his palms and her body, something luminous and vaporous seemed to flow from her to him, like a current of pale blue light. Mrs. Simmons lay perfectly still, her face slack, her chest barely rising with shallow breaths. The monitor beside her bed showed her heart rate slowing, 60, 55, 50. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice shrill with fear and shock. Marcus turned slowly and I recoiled. His face was transformed. Younger somehow, the lines around his eyes and mouth smoothed away, his skin almost glowing with vitality. But his eyes, God, his eyes, they were entirely black, without iris or white, like holes cut into reality. The luminous current between his hands and Mrs. Simmons's body snapped like a broken thread. She gasped, a terrible rattling sound, and the monitor began to wail as her heart rate plummeted. "Code blue," I shouted, lunging for the emergency button on the wall. "Room 326. Marcus moved with inhuman speed, his hand closing around my wrist before I could reach the button. His grip was like iron, painful in its intensity. You shouldn't have interfered, Alina, he said, his voice different deeper, resonating with something ancient and terrible. This doesn't concern you. Let go of me, I hissed, trying to wrench free. What did you do to her? The alarm on Mrs. Simmons's heart monitor continued to scream as her vitals crashed. Marcus glanced at her, then back at me, his expression calculating. She was already dying, he said, as if explaining something simple to a child. I merely hastened the process. Redirected the energy that would be wasted in her final hours. You're killing her, I shouted, still struggling against his grip. His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. No, Alina. I'm surviving. The door burst open as the code team responded to the alarm. Marcus released me so suddenly that I stumbled backward, nearly falling. By the time I regained my balance, his appearance had returned to normal, the distinguished doctor, concerned for his patient. She crashed suddenly, he told the team, stepping back to let them work. Dr. Chen and I were just checking on her. I opened my mouth to contradict him, to tell them what I'd seen, but the words died in my throat. Who would believe me that our respected new doctor was somehow draining the life force from patients, that his eyes turned black and his face changed? They'd think I was having a psychotic break from overwork. I watched numbly as they tried to resuscitate Mrs. Simmons. Marcus caught my eye across her bed and gave me the slightest shake of his head, a warning. Mrs. Simmons didn't survive, cause of death. Cardiac arrest due to advanced heart failure, expected given her condition. No one questioned it. After the team dispersed and Mrs. Simmons's body was taken to the morgue, Marcus cornered me in the deserted hallway. We should talk, he said quietly. My office, perhaps. It wasn't really a request. I followed him, my mind racing through options. I could run, but to where? Tell someone, but who would believe me without proof? I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I could fight it. His office was Spartan, no personal photos, no decorations, just medical texts and journals arranged with precise symmetry on the shelves. He gestured for me to sit in the chair across from his desk. I remained standing. What are you? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He smiled, removing his glasses and placing them carefully on the desk. Direct. I appreciate that about you, Alina. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. I'm a doctor just like you. I heal the sick, ease suffering. I simply require certain accommodations to continue my work. You're killing people. I'm selecting those who are already near death and redirecting their remaining life energy. Energy that would be wasted otherwise. He spread his hands, a gesture of reasonableness. Think of it as a form of organ donation. They no longer need what I take. This is insane, I whispered. You're insane. His expression hardened. I've been practicing medicine for a very long time, Alina, longer than you might believe possible. How long? The question slipped out before I could stop it. He smiled again, that terrible smile that never reached his eyes. I received my first medical degree in 1879, Vienna. I've had many names since then, many positions at many hospitals, always moving on when questions arise, as they inevitably do. I felt dizzy, the room seeming to tilt around me. That's impossible, is it? You saw what you saw tonight, the energy transfer, the rejuvenation. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. I discovered it by accident, you know. I was a young doctor, desperately trying to save a dying patient. In my grief and exhaustion, I felt something, a connection, a current flowing between us as he died. I was stronger afterward, more vital. The small lines that had begun to form on my face disappeared. I didn't age for nearly a decade after that first time. So you're what, some kind of vampire? He laughed, a surprisingly genuine sound, nothing so melodramatic. I'm a scientist who discovered something extraordinary. The human body generates energy, electrical, chemical, spiritual, if you believe in such things. When death approaches, that energy dissipates, returns to the universe. I've simply found a way to harness it, to use it to sustain myself. To keep yourself young, I said, disgust evident in my voice. To continue my work, he corrected. Do you know how many lives I've saved in my career? Thousands, tens of thousands perhaps. A few dozen deaths to enable that. It's a favorable ratio, wouldn't you agree? I stared at him, horrified by his calm rationalization of murder. In Boston. They were investigating you. His expression darkened. A nurse, much like you, too observant for her own good. She didn't understand what she was seeing. A chill ran through me. What happened to her? She had an unfortunate accident. Late at night, deserted parking garage. Such a dangerous place for a woman alone. His eyes held mine, the threat unmistakable. You won't get away with this, I said, trying to inject confidence into my voice. I'll go to the police, the medical board. With what evidence? He interrupted. Your word against mine, a respected physician versus a clearly exhausted, stressed colleague making outlandish accusations. He shook his head. Be reasonable, Alina. Even if someone believed you enough to investigate, I'd be long gone before anything came of it. And you, he left the sentence unfinished, the implication hanging in the air between us. I knew he was right. I had no proof, nothing concrete to take to authorities, just my word against his, and a story so bizarre it sounded like the delusion of an overworked mind. "What do you want from me?" I finally asked. He smiled, seemingly pleased by my capitulation. "Nothing. Continue your work. Pretend this conversation never happened. In a few months, I'll move on as I always do. Find another hospital, another name. You'll never see me again, and in the meantime, you'll keep killing patients." He sighed, as if disappointed by my persistence. "I'll be discreet. Only the terminal, the elderly, those already at death's door." "You won't even notice." "I'll know," I said quietly. "Every unexplained death, every patient who crashes unexpectedly, I'll know it was you." He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Then perhaps it would be better if you took some time off, stress leave. I could speak to administration, suggest your recent behavior indicates burnout." The threat was clear. If I didn't back down, he'd discredit me professionally, maybe worse. "Fine," I said, hating the defeat in my voice. "I'll keep quiet for now." He nodded, satisfied. A wise decision. Now I believe we both have patients to attend to. I left his office on shaky legs, my mind reeling. I had just agreed to be complicit in murder, to turn a blind eye while Marcus Holloway drained the life from vulnerable patients. But what choice did I have? Without evidence, without allies, I was powerless against him. That night, I didn't go home after my shift. Instead, I went to the hospital's medical library and began researching. If Marcus was telling the truth about his age, there might be records, photographs, something to corroborate his story or provide evidence of his lies. I started with medical journals from the late 19th century, searching for any mention of a brilliant young doctor in Vienna. It was tedious work, made more difficult by my limited German and the archaic medical terminology. But after hours of searching, I found something. A photograph from 1882, showing the staff of Vienna General Hospital. And there, in the back row, stood a man who was unmistakably Marcus Holloway. Different name in the caption, Dr. Heinrich Müller, but the same face, the same penetrating gaze. My hands trembled as I printed the image. It wasn't proof of his crimes, but it confirmed his impossible claim about his age. Whatever Marcus was, he wasn't human, at least not entirely. Over the next week, I gathered what evidence I could. I reviewed the charts of patients who had died unexpectedly during Marcus's shifts, looking for patterns. They existed, deaths clustering between 2 and 4 a.m., patients who had been stable suddenly crashing, causes of death that were plausible but convenient. Heart failure, stroke, pulmonary embolism, things that could happen naturally but were also easy to attribute to a patient's underlying condition. I also began searching for similar patterns at other hospitals where Marcus, or someone matching his description under different names, had worked. Boston Memorial, Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, a hospital in Chicago before that, each showing the same statistical anomaly, a slight but significant increase in unexplained deaths during night shifts, followed by a return to normal rates after a particular doctor left the staff. All the while, I maintained a facade of normalcy around Marcus. I worked my shifts, treated my patients, and pretended I hadn't seen what I had seen. But I watched him constantly, noting which patients he took special interest in, which rooms he lingered in during the quiet hours of the night. And I noticed something else. He was watching me too. His eyes followed me around the ward, his casual questions about my well-being carrying veiled threats. Twice I caught him near my locker, though he claimed to be simply passing by. Once I returned to my apartment to find things subtly out of place. A book moved, a drawer not quite closed. Nothing I could prove was intrusion, but enough to send a message. I'm watching you. The breaking point came 3 weeks after our confrontation. I was working the night shift, monitoring a 16-year-old girl named Lily who had been admitted after a severe asthma attack. She was stabilized and sleeping peacefully when I checked on her at midnight. At 2:30 a.m., I realized I hadn't seen Marcus for almost an hour. A sick feeling of dread washed over me as I hurried toward Lily's room. The door was closed. I could hear that now familiar chanting from within. Without hesitation, I shoved the door open. Marcus stood over Lily's bed, his hands extended as before, that eerie blue luminescence flowing from her body to his. Her face was gray, lips tinged blue, the monitor showing her oxygen levels plummeting. "Stop," I shouted, lunging forward. He turned, those black, empty eyes fixing on me, but this time I was prepared. I swung the fire extinguisher I had grabbed from the hallway, connecting solidly with the side of his head. Marcus staggered, the luminous connection between him and Lily breaking. He snarled an inhuman sound and reached for me, his fingers elongated into claw-like appendages. I discharged the fire extinguisher directly into his face. He reeled backward, choking and disoriented, giving me the chance to reach Lily. I hit the code button and began rescue breathing, desperately trying to get oxygen into her failing lungs. Marcus recovered quickly, wiping the chemical residue from his eyes. "You've made a grave mistake, Alina," he growled, his voice distorted, deeper than humanly possible. "Help," I screamed, continuing CPR. "Someone help us." He moved toward me, his face shifting, becoming something less than human, skin stretched too tight over protruding bones, eyes black and bottomless, mouth opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. The door burst open as the code team arrived. Marcus froze, his features snapping back to human normalcy so quickly I almost doubted what I'd seen. "She's in respiratory arrest," I gasped, continuing chest compressions. Dr. Holloway was just. I looked around, but Marcus had vanished. The team took over Lily's care, intubating her and stabilizing her breathing. I slipped out, determined to find Marcus before he could escape or harm anyone else. I found him in the parking garage, moving with unnatural speed toward his car. I had my phone out, recording as I followed. "Marcus," I called, "or Heinrich Mueller. Or whatever your real name is." He turned, his face contorted with rage. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the garage, he looked ancient and predatory, his carefully maintained human disguise slipping. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he hissed. "The work I do, the lives I save, they're worth the sacrifices." "You're a parasite," I said, continuing to record. "Feeding on the vulnerable, justifying murder as some kind of noble exchange." He laughed, a hollow, terrible sound. "And what will you do? Show them your little video. Tell them about the immortal doctor who drains life energy. They'll commit you, Alina, and I'll simply move on as I always have." "Maybe," I agreed, "but first I'll make sure everyone in this hospital knows what you are. I'll send this to every staff member, every board member, every patient. I have the records from other hospitals too, the statistical anomalies, the unexplained deaths that follow you wherever you go. Enough to start an investigation at the very least." His expression shifted, calculation replacing anger. "You would risk your career, your reputation, on a crusade no one will believe. To stop you from killing again, yes." He studied me for a long moment, then sighed, a surprisingly human sound. "You're not the first, you know. Others have discovered me over the centuries. Some I've had to eliminate. Others became collaborators, understanding the greater good of my work." "And which am I to be?" I asked, my finger hovering over the send button on my phone. His smile was cold. "Neither, I think. You're too principled to join me, too valuable to kill. A talented physician, the world needs more like you." He opened his car door. "I'll go, find another hospital, another identity. But remember this, Alina, I am not the only one of my kind. We are few, but we exist throughout the medical profession. Watching, waiting, feeding." A chill ran through me. "There are more like you. We're drawn to hospitals, to places of transition between life and death. The energy there, it sustains us." He slid into the driver's seat. "Look for us in the night shift, in the ICU, in hospice care. We're there extending our lives through the deaths of others. I'll find them," I promised. "I'll expose all of you." He laughed again, starting the engine. "Perhaps you'll try. But ask yourself this, that colleague who never seems to age, who thrives on the night shift, who's always present when a patient unexpectedly crashes. Can you be certain they're not one of us?" With that parting shot, he drove away, leaving me standing alone in the parking garage, my phone still recording the empty space where he had been. I reported Marcus's disappearance the next day, sharing my suspicions about the unexplained deaths, though not the supernatural elements of what I'd witnessed. An investigation was launched, but as Marcus had predicted, he was long gone. His apartment emptied, his credentials vanished from the systems that had verified them, his very existence seemingly erased. Lily recovered fully, with no memory of what had happened that night. The other staff attributed her crisis to a secondary asthma attack, and my story of finding Marcus standing over her was dismissed as confusion in the heat of the moment. Life at Mercy General returned to normal. The unexplained death ceased. My colleagues gradually forgot about the brilliant doctor who had come and gone so mysteriously. But I haven't forgotten. I watch more carefully now. I notice which doctors prefer the night shift, which ones never seem to age, which ones are present during those inexplicable crashes. I keep records, gather evidence, build my case. And sometimes in the quietest hours of the night shift, when the hospital seems to hold its breath, I feel eyes watching me from the shadows. I hear whispers in languages long dead. I glimpse movements at the corner of my vision, figures that vanish when I turn to look directly at them. They know I'm watching, and they're watching me in return. So if you find yourself in a hospital bed late at night and a doctor you don't recognize enters your room, eyes a little too intent, smile never quite reaching those eyes, call for help. Call for a nurse, another doctor, anyone, because the night shift has its own predators, and to them, your remaining life force is simply energy to be harvested, another meal to extend their unnatural existence. I know they're real. I've seen them feed, and I fear that one day they'll come for me.